You probably thought last year would be different. Not magically better, not perfect, just different enough to matter. You told yourself things like, I'm done wasting time. I just need to lock in again. Once things settle down, I'll make a real push. And for a while, it felt true. You watched the videos. You saved the notes. You had those late night moments where everything made sense. And you thought, yeah, this is the year. But if you're being honest, when you look back now, nothing really changed. You stayed busy. You stayed informed. You stayed tired. But you didn't become meaningfully different. Not in how you show up. Not in how you use your time. Not in how much you trust yourself to actually follow through. And here's the part most people get wrong. It wasn't because you weren't motivated. You were motivated. You felt it in bursts. After a good video, after a scare, after a moment where you promised yourself you'd stop playing around, motivation showed up. It just never stayed. So you told yourself the usual things. I'm burned out. I'll reset next month. Now isn't the right time. And that felt reasonable because you weren't quitting. You were just waiting. But waiting has a way of disguising itself as patience. Weeks passed, then months. Nothing dramatic happened. No crash, no failure. Just the quiet realization that the year ended and you're still the same person having the same conversations in your head. And that's the most frustrating part. There wasn't a single moment where you clearly chose not to change. Just 1,000 small moments where you didn't follow through and told yourself it didn't really matter. If this feels familiar, good. Because if motivation wasn't the problem, then blaming motivation has been keeping you stuck. And that's what we need to talk about. The problem wasn't that you didn't want it badly enough. It wasn't that you lacked discipline. The problem is that you kept living in reaction mode, where your days were decided for you before you ever got a chance to decide for yourself. You woke up and immediately responded to messages, to stress, to noise, to whatever felt urgent that morning. And by the time you thought about your own goals, your best focus was already gone. Not because you're weak, because that's how modern life is designed. But here's where the responsibility comes back to you. You didn't protect anything. No protected time, no protected energy, no protected priorities. You tried to fit change into the cracks of an already crowded day, and then wondered why it never stuck. Every time things got uncomfortable, you told yourself you'd deal with it later. Every time you felt resistance, you waited for motivation to rescue you. And motivation did show up. Briefly. But motivation can't survive in a life with no boundaries. So instead of changing how your life was structured, you kept blaming how you felt inside it. You told yourself you needed a better mindset, more clarity, more inspiration. But clarity doesn't come first. Structure does. Here's the line that changes everything. You didn't fail because you stopped trying. You failed because you never stopped negotiating. You negotiated in the morning. You negotiated when the work felt boring. You negotiated when following through felt inconvenient. And every small negotiation felt harmless. It wasn't, because those negotiations trained you, quietly, consistently, to stop trusting yourself. Not in some dramatic, obvious way. Just enough that when you said, I'll do it tomorrow, a part of you already knew you probably wouldn't. That's the real damage last year did. Not to your progress, to your credibility, with yourself. And until that changes, no amount of motivation will save you. Most people don't get trapped by laziness. They get trapped by stories that sound reasonable. Here are a few of the biggest ones. Once I get motivated again, everything will click. That idea is everywhere. Social media, podcasts, highlight reels. You see success, and here, I just decided to change. What you don't see is the structure that came first, the boundaries, the repetition, the unglamorous consistency. So you internalize the wrong lesson. You start thinking motivation is the engine, when it's actually the exhaust. I just have a lot going on right now. That's usually true. You do have responsibilities, pressure, people depending on you. But notice what that story does. It turns delay into maturity. It reframes avoidance as patience. So instead of asking, "What am I willing to protect?" you keep asking, "When will things calm down?" And they never do. Modern life doesn't slow down. It fills whatever space you give it. I already know what to do. And you probably do. That's the problem. Knowing becomes a substitute for doing. You watch, you learn, you nod along. And because you understand the ideas, it feels like progress, even when nothing changes. This creates a dangerous illusion. Informed, but unchanged. Aware, but uncommitted. Prepared, but unproven. I'll start when I feel ready. That one sounds wise. Healthy, self-aware. But readiness is a moving target. Every time you wait to feel ready, your standards quietly lower. You normalize delays. You make peace with half effort. Not because you want to, because it's easier than starting. Here's the through line. These stories protect your self-image in the short term while stealing your momentum in the long term. They make you feel reasonable today and regretful later. And the reason they work is because they don't feel like lies. They feel like explanations. But explanations don't change outcomes. Only structure does. Only standards do. Only decisions that remove negotiation do. Nothing terrible happens when you stay the same for a year. You don't lose everything. Your life doesn't fall apart. People don't confront you. You just drift. And drift is dangerous precisely because it feels harmless. Now imagine nothing changes this year either. Not because you quit, but because you keep telling yourself you'll get serious soon. 3 years pass. Same responsibilities, same routines, same explanations. You've learned more, watched more, thought about changing more. But when someone asks how things are going, you give the same answer. I'm working on it. The unsettling part isn't that you'll be miserable. It's that you'll be functional. Functional enough to keep going, busy enough not to reflect, comfortable enough not to panic. That's how time disappears. The real cost isn't that you fail to become exceptional. It's that you quietly abandon the version of yourself you once believed you'd grow into. And here's where it hits identity. Every year you delay, you send yourself a message. Not in words, but in evidence. You teach yourself that discomfort leads to negotiation. That effort versus comfort usually ends with comfort winning. That tomorrow is optional. Those lessons bleed into everything. Your goals get vaguer. Your self-talk gets quieter. Your promises get smaller because disappointment is exhausting. You were never supposed to rely on motivation to fix last year. Motivation was never the engine. It was the signal. A signal that something mattered to you. But signals don't move anything on their own. Structure does. The real reason nothing changed last year is that you kept trying to build change on top of a life that never made room for it. You treated consistency like a personality trait instead of an environment problem. So every time things got busy, energy dipped, life applied pressure, change collapsed. Not because you're unreliable, because nothing protected your follow-through. So here's the move. You don't need to become more disciplined. You need to remove negotiation. Most people think discipline means forcing yourself to do things you don't feel like doing. That's exhausting. It doesn't last. Real discipline is quieter. It's deciding in advance what matters, and then designing your life so the decision doesn't get debated every day. When negotiation disappears, effort drops. Not because the work gets easier, because the internal argument disappears. No more should I? No more maybe later? No more bargaining, just execution. And here's the relief. You don't need to overhaul your entire life. You don't need a perfect routine. You don't need more inspiration. You don't need to feel ready. You need fewer decisions. Last year drained you. not because you did too much, but because you decided too much. Every day you reopen decisions that should have been closed. That's why you were tired. When the standard is set, you don't wake up wondering who you're going to be. That day, you already know. And slowly, almost without noticing, your self-trust starts to come back. Not because you're doing more, because you're doing what you said you would. That's the real shift. Not motivation, reliability. This isn't about hype. It's not about becoming a new person overnight. It's a quiet choice. Stop negotiating with yourself, because every time you negotiate, you push the life you want a little further away and make the life you're living a little more permanent. You don't need to do everything. You don't need to fix your whole life. You just need to stop lying to yourself about what you're willing to tolerate. Because the life you want is built by the version of you who keeps their word, especially when it would be easier not to. That's not pressure. That's freedom. Freedom from starting over. Freedom from self-doubt. Freedom from wondering if you're capable. You are. The only question left is whether you're willing to act like it, consistently when no one's watching, because that's where change actually happens. And that's where this year is decided.